You should put in a disclaimer in our video saying that we're idiots and that the gameplay sucks because our IQs are both 71. Yeah.
So what are we talking about?
We're talking about Trout Mask Replica. That's what we're talking about.
And it's by Captain Beefheart, and
Yeah,
it's
Captain Beefheart and his magic band, and I chose Trout Mask Replica. We're gonna do Scaruffi's list, right?
yep, Scroofy's list.
Well, that's the
That's
whole
the one.
deal, yeah. So everybody knows, everybody on the internet is delves into internet music communities knows who Piero Scaruffi is. I picked his list above other lists because it's more interesting. Like with if you did a lot of aggregated lists, you would see lots of repeats of bands that don't do a ton of. I mean, they're kind of interesting sometimes, but they aren't like overwhelmingly interesting. Like you see a lot of repeats of Pink Floyd, lots of repeats of the Beatles, lots of repeats of Radiohead. When really there's, I mean, they're fine albums, but there's not that much new being offered. And with Scaruffi, a little bit more. It's a little bit more unique, I guess, is the kind of the deal breaker. And he has an interesting list.
hmm
So yeah, so we're starting off with his number one, and that would be Trout Mask Replica. Austin, what did you think of Trout Mask Replica?
So when I first listened to it, I hated it. I thought it was
Yeah,
horrible. It was just random noise, and then a guy just singing to nothing for a good portion of the album.
yeah, that's the usual first opinion. That was my first opinion.
hmm I listened to it again though, and it was very tiring. Like I felt like I wanted to take a shower after listening to the album, or like
Yeah,
nap for 20 years. And it was mostly because I was just really trying to listen and really trying to understand why it was influential. And I actually didn't really get that until today when I was
yeah,
listening through all the albums that you sent me
yeah.
um, to kind of
And
review
that's
them.
just like a cut of it. Hold on, my cat's being annoying.
Yeah, cat.
Things that I thought, either influenced or took influence from Beefheart. That's just like that's not even close to everything. Entire genres that were basically like a ton of noise rock, ton of a ton of like post punk stuff was left out of that list. Just an infinite number of things. It's not even close to everything, but yeah, I just want you to get the gist of what was going on
I
with the
was
influence part.
I was surprised by how much influence he had over punk.
Yeah,
I was not expecting like the punk albums to be like I didn't expect it because I didn't hear it, and then when I actually went to listen to see the influence, I could hear it almost clearly in punk.
yeah, yeah. Especially with really dissonant bands like Contortions and um, Pop Group, which is another Scaruffi core kind of band. Um, what else did I put on there for punk?
Uh, there were some albums I listened to already, like Pop Group Y,
Yeah,
which I listened to when because I listened through this album not on my own. We've just been kind of listening to it in general through the Scroofy list.
yeah.
Uh, and I there was a lot of people that were influenced by his voice, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to determine. He could be construed as being proto, like, harsh vocals almost, but that's kind of hard to determine. Like, there's some people who just obviously took some of his antics and were influenced by it, like David Thomas of Pure Ubu. The clearest example is probably Tom Waits. Um, Tom Waits, like apparently Tom Waits changed his entire career to
Oh,
like Beefheart's vocals. Anything, yeah.
jeez.
Um, Maybe I shouldn't have put vocals for some of them because
Yeah, I was interested in the vocals because in the earlier part of the list you sent me, it was inspirations for Beefheart, like
Yeah.
free jazz. Uh, and I hate free jazz. I just hate that style of random garbage. But there was
Mhm.
some that were really awesome, like B.B. King. His music was great.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, that's part of the blues. Yeah, his vocals come a lot from the blues, and also he literally does blues rock,
mhm.
or a distortion of it in Trout Mask Replica. I listed T-Bone Walker, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, and then if you listen to Howlin' Wolf, you can absolutely tell that Beefheart was, at least early in his career, his bass line kind of starts as a bad impersonation of Howlin' Wolf, and then kind of expands on the vocals of Howlin' Wolf.
Yeah,
Probably it expands the range and the kind of craziness. I don't really know what else to call it.
yeah. I was listening to Howling Wolf, and I thought the vocals were almost identical
Yeah, yeah.
to Beefheart, and so
At,
when
at least within the range that Muddy Waters is able to sing, they're very very close.
mhm. uh, so when you're putting influence in vocals, I almost I first I cocked my head like really because it just seemed like uh, he almost copied them from Howling Wolf. I don't want to say copy. You know, it seems like he had the influence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't always use copy as a pejorative though. So I
Mhm.
guess you can say copy.
But there was the most interesting aspect to me was actually the you gave me like a classical list.
Oh yeah, and that's more of a cursory relation to be honest. It's just the classical list is just a bunch of people who kind of deconstructed compositional norms, and that's kind of what Beefheart did as well.
Mm.
And the three examples of that I chose were Henry Cowell, Charles Ives, and John Cage. John Cage is way, way out there, and he's not within any realm of like even close to being rock or jazz. But
John Cage is actually extremely famous for his uh,
he has a movement which is just all silence.
yeah, it was really cool. When I first listened to it, like I don't know, like 10 years ago, because they have a live recording of him when he's super fucking old and listening to it.
Yeah.
Uh, I was kind of like, wow, this is super lame. But then the video again. I watched it today because I was curious because I knew John Cage, I knew the name, and it said everything we do is music, and that actually like sounded really cool. Like it was more of like an
Really
artist
too
piece.
deep for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how into it I am for that. I mean, that's kind of, um, I mean, I value innovation in music. It's how you get new music, but sometimes the innovation is low-hanging fruit so much so that it's just like, yeah, this doesn't. To me, there's a limit. I mean, it may be innovative, but innovation doesn't equate to like being good necessarily. So,
hmm I did really like the classical stuff by the other people. Like there was the Three Irish Legends song.
yeah,
That was awesome. It was like this really creepy piano piece.
yeah.
I don't know what it is about like. So when you give me like that kind of really crazy rapid playing stuff, I hate it. But when it's like an orchestra, I love it because it's like it just
Did
reminds me
you
of watching horror movies and stuff.
Did you listen to Charles Ives, the second movement of his Fourth Symphony?
I did actually. Um, I liked. I was watching the video for it, and I got really distracted because the piano player gets really into it. Like he's really swaying back and forth, but he's swaying in like the dumbest way.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't be like, oh, he's so stupid, and it was distracting, but it was stupid and distracting, but it's just, like what he was doing. But I liked it. I liked it. I didn't like. I liked the Irish one way better. Three Legends or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know how much, but I should have just put Henry Cowell in general as I don't know how much the composition Three Irish Legends really has to do with Trout Mask Replica influence-wise. I just chose one of his compositions for you to listen to maybe YouTube or Google. Yeah, so those are the classical. Then backing up here, did you listen to any of Beefheart's prior records?
I did
Like his
actually.
development.
I didn't listen to fully through the prior ones, but they were very straightforward, like bluegrass albums.
Yeah, I mean, Safe as Milk is kind of just like a little bit psychedelic-y kind of bubblegum bluegrass type thing, I guess you could call it. Or blues rock. I think bluegrass might be something entirely different, but yeah, twangy blues rock, like, and it's a lot more straightforward. I mean, it's kind of weird. Some of the songs are kind of weird, but it's not that weird. It's just like a little bit of weirdness. Yeah, and those are more straightforward. Strictly Personal is a little bit more avant-garde and
Yeah,
starting to fall along the kind of direction that Beefheart would go later.
I don't know what it is. I think Beefheart has really awesome bass lines in all of his albums. Like, whenever I listen to it, I'm always like, man, this bass is sick.
Yeah, I've actually, that's the funny part about my listening to it, is I've re-listened to it really focusing on the interplay between the two main guitar parts, and especially the drums. My drums are my favorite part of the album. But the bass, for some reason, I've never really paid attention to. Maybe it's because it just kind of bubbles under, like, maybe to my ears it sounds a little bit indistinct because it's so bubbly and kind of the notes all kind of mesh together in my ears. I'll have to actually listen to the bass. Did you listen to any other instruments or isolate any others while you were listening?
When I was listening, I tried to focus on the bass, and I tried to focus on the guitar, but the guitar was really hard to focus on because it was just kind of all over the place. There were a lot of times, though, when I said, wow, this guitar part's awesome.
Yep. Yeah. That's those are my feelings as well. Sometimes it's really, really chaotic, but oftentimes, perhaps even most of the time, it's actually you can actually tell that it was composed. I mean, it's not like incredibly ridiculously like free improvisation. You can tell that there's some semblance of cadence, even if it's very weak. And that kind of brings me to the free jazz influence. There is free jazz and avant-garde jazz influence in this, without a doubt. One thing it's kind of one thing I think people kind of overstate a little bit. Like, they kind of try to downplay Beefheart by just saying, like, oh, he's just free jazz with guitars. What's the big deal? Free jazz was like starting to be invented by Ornette Coleman in like 1959. Maybe you could even go back to like Charles Mingus with Pithecanthropus erectus in 1956. But I think it's overstated because I don't think that all of the Beefheart songs in Trout Mask Replica necessarily have like an ultra strong like free jazz influence. There's some obvious ones like Frownland, which is the first track that just starts off absolutely crazy. Dachau Blues a little bit, but otherwise I think it's I don't think it's like, I don't think a lot of the album is as free jazzy as people think. Certainly not like the a cappella songs, for one. So that's the obvious counterexample. China Pig is just outright, it's just an electric blues track. There's nothing like free jazzy about that one at all. And what else? And then even really complicated songs like My Human Gets Me Blues or Steal Softly Through Snow. I would say it's not actually it's not actually as completely chaotic as one would think if one understands what like all the parts are doing after listening over and over again. I think what kind of throws people off the first time is that there's a lot of instruments doing vastly different things at the same time, and the choice of notes and like chords and things like that is unorthodox, extremely unorthodox. But it's not like complete chaos like you would see sometimes in free jazz music. There are some parts that are actually quite carefully composed that aren't just total chaos or as free-flowing and semi-improvisational even as free jazz would be. Although it does, make no mistake, it is influenced by free jazz. But I think it's overstated a little bit. I think he's a little bit more unique than people give him credit for in that respect.
He definitely seemed unique. I just really hate Squidward Core.
Yeah, so if anyone ever listens to this podcast, we have dubbed whenever anybody uses like a grating clarinet noise, we've dubbed that to be called Squidward Core.
Yeah, it's horrible. Well, it's not horrible, I just hate it.
Yeah.
Like, I can see why people like it, though, because I was in a band in high school, and it's like, if you made that noise, you made a mistake.
Yeah.
Just grinds my gears.
What else do we have? Yeah, the Squidward Core, I think, kind of comes... Well, that obviously comes from free jazz, but if you listen to Out to Lunch by Eric Dolphy, it has a little bit of that.
I did listen to that, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit because the very first song sounded so familiar to me, and I had no idea why.
Let me take a listen real quick.
It sounded like I was watching a cartoon from like the 80s or 90s where like Bugs Bunny is completely silent except for music, and he's like just going out and doing something, and the bass line is him walking, and like you hear like a piano going off, and it's like a car driving by and something like that, and that's what it sounded like to me. And
oh yeah, I'm listening to it as you describe it, and I'm actually visualizing a cartoon.
But I couldn't, when I Googled it to try to figure out, like, maybe it was part of, like, a Bugs Bunny cartoon, I couldn't find anything on it. I could just find the album.
Yeah. Is it kind of late release date for it to be part of a Bugs Bunny cartoon? I have no clue.
I'm not really sure on that. I thought the album was... When was Out to Lunch released?
64.
64. It shouldn't be too bad. But I don't know fully.
I know my favorite example of Squidward Core, like just a full album of Squidward Core, is Spiritual Unity by Albert Eiler. Did you take a listen to that one? I feel like you would remember that one.
I feel like I would. I listened to Free Jazz, whoever wrote that.
Ornette Coleman.
And I listened to the first little bit, and I was like, oh god, no. And then I listened to Out to Lunch, and the first song was like, oh, this is great. And then I think I clicked through it a little bit more, and it was like, oh, this still kind of is, And so I think I just gave up on the jazz.
Oh, okay, yeah. Spiritual Unity is Squidward Core jazz, like saxophone improvisations by Albert Eiler, the Albert Eiler Trio. Yeah, we've already talked about his blues influences. I guess we can go into who he sort of influenced.
You
Before that, have you heard the story behind like how the album was made?
told me once. I
Yeah,
think it'd be a
yeah.
great thing to hear again, because I was almost shocked
Yeah,
when you
I
first told
wonder.
me.
I wonder how much of it is apocryphal, because it sounds so extreme that nobody would tolerate it.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so the story is that they rented a dilapidated house in Los Angeles, and the entire Magic Band lived there. And Beefheart was like just an absolute tyrant, and not just a tyrant in like insofar as like personal relationships. Sometimes someone is a tyrant and you just ignore them and they're kind of an asshole or whatever. No, he was like abusive. That's probably a better term for it. Like actually in a legal sense, like actually abusive, like throwing people into closets until they got things right. Um,
Wait, they like played the guitar in a closet while he listened or something?
no, no, no. There's one story that I read, and of course, a lot of this is probably apocryphal, but there's one story that I read where he didn't like how someone was playing, so he locked them in a closet with a tape recorder that played a certain blues record. And Beefheart claimed that if you listened in isolation to that blues record while being locked in that closet, that you were gonna remove C, like the C note, from your mind.
What?
Yeah, I don't know. This is unsourced, by the way. This is just something I remember seeing or reading. Yeah, so you wanted someone to remove C,
Okay.
like, I don't know, and he did it by locking them in a closet and having them listen to some blues record.
I see.
Yeah, and then apparently they only ate beans. And they didn't have any money, and yeah, just a whole bunch of crazy stuff the validity of which I doubt. And if it's not true, it'd be a very nasty slander of an artistic genius. So I tend to err on the side of, yeah, I err on the side of caution when assessing those types of claims, especially if they sound so much not like something that somebody would do. Just period. Uh,
Yeah, I tried listening to the album with that in mind, and it made it seem so much weirder.
yeah, and there's also claims that some of the songs are. I know for a fact that people claim that one of the songs, which is I think it was My Human Gets Me Blues, is basically the lyrics are just yelling at the drummer. Like, and of course it's like a really abstract yelling. Like from what I garner from it, so the lyrics to My Human Gets Me Blues, what the hell are they? Yeah, from what I garner from it, it's basically uh, it's basically Beefheart calling the John French, their drummer, a little girl or something, or like a girl,
That's so
because
weird.
he's like saying, "I saw you, baby, dancing in your X-ray gingham dress, like how you're wearing a dress. You don't scare me because I got you here in my eye."
That's so weird because we talked about this last week. Uh, there's a theory that the album is written for children.
I saw something where he dedicated it's I don't know if that's a theory about the album. Uh I read somewhere that in general or it was a TV interview from the 80s and uh some talking head said that Beefheart devoted his albums to animals and children. And that was just kind of, I don't even think it came from Beefheart's mouth. So take that with a grain of salt. And I was just saying that would make sense because it could pass as like a children's album. Just something that you like someone would make for kids to make kids laugh. And
Maybe if he's yelling at that guy though, it feels weird.
yeah, and that also the theory of it's just all for the children is kind of undermined by the whole like. I think it's undermined actually now that I think about it, because if the process was as abusive as is alleged, then there's probably no way. And he told John French relates in a documentary interview that Beefheart was saying that reporters and documentary makers are going to come to your house one day and ask you about this period of your life because of how important this music is. And it's kind of evidence that he's super serial about it and not like, let's make it for the children.
Yeah, but it's like
maybe later in his life.
Yeah.
Maybe after he was kind of tired out and past that. And the interview was from the 80s. Yeah. It's still the final product, regardless of intention, kind of sounds like it could pass as a children's album. My cat's been annoying again, so just edit this out while I go. Okay, go on. What else was there?
What'd you think of the skits? Like the random like people yelling and
okay. So the skits are very likely to be. I wonder if Frank Zappa actually inserted the skits himself. Do you know are you familiar with Frank Zappa?
I listened to a couple of his albums because he posted some of his stuff, and I thought they were really good actually. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed them.
Oh yeah. So I posted Freak Out, We're Only in It for the Money, Absolutely Free, and Uncle Meat.
Yeah.
And those were basically all of his important albums before the release of Trout Mask Replica. And he's very largely responsible, not for the content of Trout Mask Replica, but for the release and kind of business logistics and recording logistics of Trout Mask Replica, because I don't think anybody else would have given Beefheart a chance to record Trout Mask Replica and make an investment to release it. And Frank Zappa was kind of a godsend for someone who is as free-spirited as Captain Beefheart, because Zappa was a very artistically oriented person. Right? He's a little, in a sense, anti-commercial, even though he was a very good businessman.
There were, like, clicking through his albums, there was actually a lot of times where I was like, oh, I wish I could just stop and listen to this, so I don't have time to.
Yeah, we'll get to him. He has a 9-rated album called Uncle Meat that we'll eventually talk about. And his other ones are important enough to perhaps talk about some other time too. So yeah, you should definitely listen to Zappa, especially early Zappa. Early Zappa is very good, but he does have some very good releases even in the mid-70s and even in the 80s. So he's very prolific, and he's very he's well regarded as a classical musician, as a conductor, as a jazz musician, and as a rock musician. So he's way up there in terms of most talented artists, in terms of sheer creativity. So yeah, you should check him out. And also his music is more enjoyable on like a visceral level than Beefheart is. So there's that advantage too.
Mm. But yeah, he produced the album or made it.
Yeah, so Frank Zappa is credited as the producer, so that is an official fact. I fact checked that, but I didn't like fact check any of some of the anecdotes that I spouted off. But whatever, I know I heard them somewhere. Uh, just a matter of God, my cat is so annoying when he wants out. Cat break.
But we were talking about, you thought that Frank Zappa just introduced the skits himself.
Yeah, so the skits, there's a ton of little skits throughout Frank Zappa albums.
Hmm.
And, yeah, I mean, that's just something he does that he made more prominent in his albums than prior people. So I think that the skits were at least influenced by them for sure, by him for sure, if not just outright his idea during the recording session. And also there's one song actually. I said maybe not the content, but the mute or like maybe not the content, but this like the skits were influenced by him. There's actually one piece called The Blimp. If you listen to The Blimp, that's not the Magic Band playing. That is actually the Mothers of Invention.
Oh, really?
Yep. Yeah, the Mothers of Invention play that little. And in fact, that little part will reappear as a song on their 1970 album, Weasels Ripped My Flesh.
Hmm. That guitar part is very familiar to me. Like, I swear I hear it in like Cowboy Bebop's theme song and all sorts of stuff. Which was what, Tank? Yeah.
It's just a jazzy kind of.
Something, I don't know. It's very
It's
familiar.
it's the Blimp is the song.
Hmm.
Yeah, so then
But yeah, the skits were interesting to me because with the story of them being locked in a house for forever, the skits didn't make sense because they weren't precise. Like there was a part where they just started going bulbous like over and over again, and there's a part where he's like, "Should we restart?" And he's like, "Yeah," and then he just started saying it again, and I was like,
I
"Whoa."
hear a bunch of different things. Like some people even claim that the musicians had full freedom of interpretation, and that's why the album kind of sounds like it's improvised a little bit. Um, but then you hear like Beefheart wanted his stuff played so precisely that he would lock people in closets and he would not let anybody out of the house except to get groceries, and uh, only one was allowed to go at a time, and all this like weird stuff that suggested that he really wanted it precise. Um, and funnily enough, um, it's not improvised, and there's a number of pieces of evidence for that. For one, there's I can link you to it here. There's the instrumentals I found. There's like an album that has like instrumentals. Or like recordings of Woodland, of the house in Woodland Hills, and like their I think it's their rehearsals, but here's one of them. It's Still Softly Through Snow. So that's in your Skype window, and it's mostly the same, barring a few minor differences and difference in like recording quality. It's actually mostly the same. as the studio recording. Yeah, I'm just saying. There's kind of a debate going on, like, was it improvised, and or was it a composed thing? And these recordings make me think that it was a planned thing.
The bulbous thing was hilarious, though. Oh my god. I was laughing my ass off when
That's
they
the
just all started
most.
going bulbous,
That's the most oft repeated line when referencing that album is Fast and Bulbous.
Yeah.
So if somebody says Fast and Bulbous, they're probably giving a nod to Trout Mask Replica, and I've heard that album. Enjoy it. Did you listen to any of the later Beefheart albums?
I listened to one. The one that you said was actually good,
Oh,
not just a copy.
that was more original Mirror Man.
Yeah.
Because Mirror Man is kind of like his other ones are kind of just like watered down Trout Mask replicas.
Hmm.
They're good, and I enjoy listening to them. And there's four of those. First, Lick My Decals Off, Baby. And then way later, almost into 1980, actually into the early 80s, Shiny Beast, Dock at the Radar Station, and Ice Cream for Crow. They're quality albums, but they're kind of like low-key Trout Mask Replica type things. Although Lick My Decals Off has like a couple songs that outdo Trout Mask Replica in the absolute craziness, and those would probably be Dr. Dark and I think it's Dr. Dark and Flash Gordon's Ape, but yeah. And then Mirror Man is a standout. I think it's his second best album.
Hmm.
It's kind of like a really long jam band album, but with like it's like a very loosely played, gritty, uh, just kind of bluesy jam. I don't know. I just like it, and it's different from Trout Mask Replica. It's not trying to be incredibly avant-garde, but it's very unique and very well played, and it's very good.
I'll have to
Uh,
listen to it again.
and then he has other albums in the mid '70s. They're terrible. I think his album I think it's Unconditionally Guaranteed might be one of the worst albums ever. Period. So it's just a big waste of time to listen to it. Um, and then he has like they're just not worth listening to. They're like really, really, really just nothing's going on. It's just like really crappy blues music is all it is. Um,
Interesting. I don't. It's weird because before you showed me the album, I never even heard of him.
yeah.
And then you were like, "This is the most influential album ever," and I was like, "No way, that's completely garbage." I figured it'd be some sort of like Metallica song or maybe Queen or the Beatles.
Yeah, not really. The Beatles predate most of the Beatles. I think almost entirely predate Trout Mask Replica. Like Trout Mask Replicas, the Beatles are almost done at this point. The Beatles released Abbey Road in the same year, but it's not going to be influenced by Trout Mask Replica. No way. And then I write after the later Beefheart albums the kind of the people who kind of are influenced by Beefheart right off the bat, or are kind of dissonant in the same way as Beefheart is. The Residents a little bit. It's probably toned down by the time they get to the album Not Available, which is that really creepy, like alien-like album that I showed you.
Ah, that album's awesome.
Yeah.
I need to listen to that more.
Yeah. Their first album, Meet the Residents, is more like dissonant and in line with Beefheart. And then they become kind of like an electronic. They become kind of electronic-y band later, and they really develop a really cool sound with like Not Available, Eskimo, those albums. And then Henry Cow and the Art Bears. When I listened to Henry Cow, like his album Unrest, and I can't remember his other major album. They both have socks on the cover.
I was really confused at first because there was like Henry Cowell, and then there was also Henry Cow.
I think Henry Cow is I wouldn't be surprised. I think Henry Cow is just a band name. Yeah, they're a group.
Oh.
So Henry Cow is a group, and it's a pseudonym kind of pun because they're influenced by Henry Cowell. So their whole thing is kind of deconstructing that stuff, or that stuff. It's deconstructing compositional, and they're very compositional traditions, and they're very yeah. They toured with Beefheart in 1974. They toured England and Europe with Beefheart, and if you listen to them, they're very obviously like an extension more probably of Zappa, because they're very jazzy, they're very they have high virtuosity, and they kind of sound like the type of fusion of jazz and rock that Zappa was doing in particular, only taken to new extremes. And you should definitely listen to Unrest. Unrest is one of my favorite albums of the entire 1970s. It's unbelievable.
Unrest, okay.
Yeah, Henry Cow Unrest. It's unbelievably good album. And then the Line of Prague that kind of took and they only released one album. It's called Music to Eat. It's the Hampton Grease Band, and they kind of played a blues prog. They're very, very unique, and they, I think, were obviously influenced by Zappa and Beefheart. And Zappa and Beefheart are so paired together because they were actually high school classmates.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were high school classmates. And they actually did recordings together as early as like 1959, I think. Yeah, so they're kind of paired together. So bands that are influenced by one are very likely to be influenced by the other.
What I was surprised about was going through Scaruffi's list. And then today, when I was looking up influences from Beefheart, what Beefheart influenced, I saw a lot of the albums from the list on there.
Yeah.
That was surprising to me by a lot. Like, I kind of expected them to be inspired by different things, because they're all really unique and different. But I guess the wanting to be unique and different makes sense, that they'd all be inspired by the same thing.
Yeah, some of them are less so, and there's also, there's also a lot more influence lines besides Beefheart that go into those albums too. So it's not as if they're just like, oh, I'm gonna redo Beefheart.
Right.
No, they take like a little thing from him, and then they add like 20 other things that were going on in the meantime that are not done by Beefheart or not explored by Beefheart. And then I don't even know what to say. There's too many bands to talk about that he influences almost to do like there's no singular band that just kind of like, or there's no singular line of bands. It's just kind of like a chaotic mash of like people taking a bunch of different things from Beefheart and doing their own thing with it. So it would be hard to talk about that.
Did you ever look into the title of the album? Why is it called Trout Mask Replica? I know it's a song. In one of the songs, they
Well,
say it.
they don't say that. I don't think they say the exact title. It's
I'm almost certain they do.
old fart at play. They don't say the exact title. Um, so the line that is kind of the four lines that are relevant to this, that the nose of the wooden mask where the holes had just been a moments ago was now smooth, amazingly blended, camouflaged in with very intricate rainbow trout replica.
Oh.
Yeah, rainbow trout replica is on Old Fardette Plays the closest thing to saying the album title in the album. It's the closest they said the thing.
I kind of thought like maybe because of the childhood thing, it would make sense that it was a Trout Mask Replica, because you could think of like almost like a cartoon character, a big funny guy with a trout mask
Yeah.
doing funny things, but then it
Well,
didn't
that's
really,
basically the cover.
yeah, um, but it didn't really make sense,
No.
I guess.
Well, nothing in this album really makes sense. Like, there's a million different interpretations of the lyrics. All of them are going to be vacuous, probably. Unless Beefheart was just some, like, metaphysical entity who's, like, some prophet or something. Like, some ultra obscured prophet. I don't know. Probably not, though. It's probably just a bunch of crap.
We talked about this last week, but a lot of the album, to me, sounded like multiple songs. Like every song sounded like it should have been like 5 songs or 6 songs, just
Yeah.
playing at once. Like every musician was playing a different thing, and we didn't really know who was supposed to be playing what, and so it really gave this feeling of chaos. Like you've lost almost complete control over your life or something like that.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it can easily be interpreted. It can be interpreted as being extremely goofy because of the dissonance. It can be interpreted as being something that is able to be listened to when you're in a bad mood. Yeah, and sometimes it can be characterized as extreme music, even in like an angry way, because of the dissonance and the harshness. And it's kind of a sad album, too. In some respects, just because of how out of it Beefheart was.
Oh,
Like, it's not fun. It's more like he's a monster shouting like a crazed man. It's not like fun clown time. It's more like I'm completely crazy and just I don't know what I'm talking about and spouting off just total nonsense things.
he's the owner of Frownland.
Well, in Frownland, he's talking about how he doesn't want to go back to your Frownland.
Yeah.
So everything else is Frownland. And his land is not Frownland. Like, once you're on the 22nd track, you're like, oh, yeah, it's another song. Wait, let me make sure the 22nd track isn't an a cappella song. Okay, it's Wildlife. Yeah, once you're on Wildlife, which is the 22nd track, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, it's another song that has 2 guitars playing parts that aren't harmonious with each other, random bass line, drums doing whatever, and then Beefheart shouting something over the composition. Yeah, it's like, okay, I've seen this before, because that's what happens in Frownland, that's what happens in Dachau Blues, Ella Guru, Moonlight in Vermont, Hachiko Cadaver, Bill's Corpse, Sweet Sweet Bulbs, Neon Meat Dream of an Octofish, My Human Gets Me Blues, Pana, When Big Joe, just like nearly, like the majority of songs are like that.
So you talked about we talked about last week what our favorite song was, and you said my
Yeah.
choice was unconventional. And to be fair, I don't actually remember my choice because it
Your
was,
choice was Fallen Ditch.
yeah, Falling Ditch, and it was because it had so much interesting parts to it. Like it had a really good bass line in the beginning, and then like I think halfway through it, it had a really cool guitar part that I really enjoyed, and so that's why I picked it. There was like 3 parts into that song where I specifically said, this chord or this couple seconds is really awesome,
Yeah.
and you said it was unconventional. But
Usually people, the popular choices I think are like Moonlight on Vermont, just because or Frownland is a common choice. Veterans Day Poppy is a common choice. I mean, it's just from informally from what I've seen people say is their favorite song from that album. I don't think my choices are the most popular either. I see Pachuco Cadaver is a lot of people's favorite. My favorites are ones in which the composition switches on a dime, like it's doing one thing and then all of a sudden it's doing something completely different, and the change happens so fast that you barely have time to register it in your mind. And that happens in Sweet Sweet Bulbs a lot, My Human Gets Me Blues, and then Steal Softly Through Snow. So those 3 are kind of ones that I've pinpointed as being my favorites of the entire album because I really like when that happens. I also like the hair pies. There's Bake 1 and Bake 2 on the album.
I liked 2. I remember thinking number 1 was
That's
horrible.
That's because they're the same thing, except for Bake One has like a clarinet duet, like a Squidward core clarinet duet, and it's long. Yeah, Bake One's like 5 minutes long, and Bake Two is like 2:23 or something.
I think Bake One. What number of song is that on the album?
It's number 5.
Number
It's
5.
after, yeah, it's after Ella Garoon before Moonlight on Vermont.
Yeah. So listening through this album, I had to take I think four breaks, and that was the first time I had to take a break. Was at that song. 'Cause then it was like when the Squidward chord hit, I was like, oh my god, I really don't want to listen to this anymore. Um, and then I took a huge period where I just didn't take a break at all because I actually started getting into the album, and I think it was from that point until like the hour mark. Like I just listened to like 40 minutes of it straight and was like actually kind of enjoying it.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of slowly grows on you as you realize kind of your brain kind of registers and becomes comfortable with the complicated interplay and the lack of orthodoxy between the different parts and the stuff like that.
Mhm. And then around the hour mark, I don't know what happened, but I just was like, I think I just got tired, or I realized, man, this all just sounds starting to sound the same or repetitive or something. I just started to really not want to listen to it anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I could see again the repetition. It's kind of a homogeneous album in a respect. He kind of establishes his formula for songwriting. That happens with a lot of albums, though, which is why albums as a whole might be overrated as a musical medium.
I would agree with
Because
that.
a lot of albums just kind of... And Trout Mask Replica, unfortunately, I have to say, kind of falls into this trap. It's kind of repeating the same idea over and over again. And this is just kind of a trapping of albums in general. If it's a concept album, it'll kind of enforce the same idea over and over and over again. And if it's not a concept album, often it's just like a bland collection of songs. Like it's not like it doesn't have a concept with it. So it might as well not be an album. So usually one of those 2 things apply. Like either it might as well not be an album is beating a dead horse by the end of the album. It's like, okay, the first song, wow, that's incredible, new idea, I've never heard that before. And then by the 24th track, you're like, yeah, okay, got it.
I tend to look for singular songs, and you tend to look for albums.
Hmm.
And when I used to do what you did, which was just look at albums, and I couldn't discern the songs at all. I'd just be like, this is a cool part, but I have no idea what song this is.
Yeah.
And it almost got me into a little bit of trouble because I was actually at a concert 2 weeks ago. I was at a Day to Remember concert, and someone was like, "Oh my God, they're gonna play this song," and it was their most popular song. I think it's "Downfall of Us All" or something like that. And I didn't recognize the title, and so I said, "What song is that?" And a lot of people gave me looks, like, "Why are you here?" kind of looks, you know. And someone started like singing the song to me. He's like, "Oh, of course I know that song. I just never look at individual songs." And so that period of my life was like over, except for like that song, that album, a couple other
Yeah.
albums. And so I
Yeah.
kind of am back to, I just kind of go on Spotify and I search an artist and I click like their most popular song and I'm like, "Oh, this is good. I don't need to listen to any more of their junk because it's all gonna sound the same."
I mean, what I do is the albums are good for getting people. It's like, here's a good collection of music or a good sample. If you have a good album, you can like, here's a good giant chunk of their music. And then after I've listened once, if I find a song really boring, I'll probably never listen to it again. Or if I find it really uninteresting in all respects, I'll probably never listen to it again. And then I take out songs that I either just really enjoy or are interesting to me, and I'll kind of keep those. And that's definitely true for Beefheart. I'd probably take, well, for Beefheart, his album's a little bit more worth listening to almost the whole way through because a lot of his songs are interesting. But for other bands, that would be what I do. It's pick and choose.
Pick and choose. How do you define a good song or good album?
There's so many ways. Like, there's no singular. Sometimes I'm just not. Honestly, there is no real way. Sometimes I'm just not in the mood,
Hmm.
honestly, to like something or find something interesting for that matter. Especially if I've just listened to something that's more relatively interesting, I'll just not find anything interesting for a little while after that. If I'm more in a mood for dissonant and complex music, I'm not going to like simpler tunes. If I'm more in the mood for simpler tunes, I'm just not going to like listening to Beefheart. It's subjective, man. And I think that's I mean, it's kind of the plebeian thing to say, but it's true. I
I,
think it's subjective, man.
I totally
So,
agree. There's so many different reasons that people make songs. Like they're trying to convey an emotion, or they're trying to make you feel how they feel, or they're trying to send a message, which is a lot of political music. It's never very easy to do. So I'm kind of in the party of if you like the song, it's a good song, and no one can
well,
tell you
yeah.
otherwise. But that gets in so much trouble because I listen to something by like Taylor Swift and I'm like, wow, this is bad. How can people like this?
Yeah, and then I sort of understand the visceral emotional reaction too, where it's like, okay, I like Taylor Swift better than Beethoven. It's kind of like, there's part of me that goes, come on. Or more like, I wish you weren't here.
I do agree. I know exactly what you're saying.
Not a death threat, but if like a cargo crate fell on your head, I wouldn't cry, like type of thing.
It definitely makes me want to listen to more classical music, considering how, like, if you were to ask someone what the greatest song of all time was,
It's probably gonna be in terms of like nuance and innovation and all that artsy fartsy stuff. It's probably gonna be in the vicinity of something you would call classical and probably classical.
right, so what I was getting at, if you asked me what the most innovative song was, or like what the best song of all time was, I'd honestly probably say Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen.
Yeah.
Um, but that's just not true. You could think of like influence. For example, you think about which song has the longest staying power, which song has the most influence, and it's honestly a Mozart song. Like, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is a Mozart song.
Yeah.
And so
Or
to me, it's that one.
if you combine influence with kind of like grandiosity of the work, so to speak, I think you can make a case for Beethoven's Ninth.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
I believe so.
Yeah, Beethoven's Ninth is like the obvious choice for like all time most influential like a combo of influence and like towering achievement and beauty and sounding nice and all of that stuff, like a happy medium between all those things, like the safe pick for best piece of music ever would be Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, I think. But
I'd
that's
have,
just
I would definitely have to research it more because I don't know that much. Because I know like Pachelbel's Canon in D, that's still played at weddings today.
yeah.
Uh,
Symphony 9 is the Ode to Joy.
yeah, that's still played a ton. Um, there's a lot of Mozart that's still like every child is taught Mozart's song.
Yeah, the
The
if
ABCs are sung to it.
you're probably gonna be picking something from Bach, Mozart, or Beethoven if you want like most influence. Those are just the safe choices. They're the obvious sort of. They're just the obvious choices. They're the boring choices, but like scholars who actually research who did what in the history of classical music and very thoroughly, and because classical music is able to be more thoroughly examined in terms of who did what because their compositions are precisely written down, whereas in rock music you kind of describe it, a lot of rock critics are just kind of like, oh, it conveys this feeling, which is kind of new, I guess. Like a lot of rock critics aren't trained in precisely describing what albums they're actually reviewing, whereas classical critics, they aren't even really critics, they're more like scholars, and they can point and say, oh, this person did this exactly, or this person changed this thing up to do this instead exactly. Right? So they actually have arguments, and the ones that they picked out as important were the boring ones that you hear about. Not boring in that their music is boring, but just boring as in they're ubiquitous. So like Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, because we can see exactly what was being done. Whereas in popular music of all stripes, it's like a little bit harder. So then you have a whole bunch of people who aren't very precise and just kind of dictate the, like, oh, this sounds different vaguely. I'll call it influential. And that's kind of mirrored in the way people talk about Beefheart, right? They don't say that, well, okay, Beefheart did exactly this to his compositions. They'll say something nebulous like, Beefheart is influenced by free jazz. Well, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean?
I have no
Like,
clue.
what is that? There's a set of albums called free jazz, okay, and then there's components of Beefheart that intuitively kind of sort of sound like that. So if you're gonna pick out like the most, it's very hard to track innovation in rock and frankly jazz to begin with because they don't write their compositions down. A lot of rock musicians don't even read music. It's not written down. They'll just kind of say, yeah, let's do this here. Let's add this idea here. Whereas with classical music, all of the scholars agree on the boring consensus because people actually wrote their compositions down because you couldn't record it. Yeah.
Running out of stuff. But we should do like a little disclaimer. We know almost nothing about music
Yeah.
I did not take a single music theory class. I took one music appreciation class at a freshman level, and I cheated the whole way through it in college. We're pretty much just two guys that like to listen to Scroofy core.
Or just albums in general.
Yeah.
And we pick Scaruffi Core. Some of Scaruffi Core, honestly, is uninteresting to me, and I still haven't figured out why you picked it. And we'll get to those, and I'll explain my reasons why.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the next one would be number 2 on the list, which would be what? Do you know?
Robert Wyatt, Rock Bottom.
Robert Wyatt, Rock Bottom. Okay, so I'll probably listen to that